We're in a series called Christianese, and we're going through some words that we often use that, especially those on the outside kind of look in, don't often understand. And the reason they don't often understand is because we don't truly understand ourselves. And so before we kind of jump into what we're going to cover today, I have a little quiz for you. Don't worry, nobody flunks out of church. All right? And so it's a pretty simple quiz, all right? We're going to play a little sound clip from a TV show, and you're try to guess in the first 5 to 7 seconds what that's from. But don't say it out loud, because don't give it away to others. Give them time to go, and then the picture will come up, and we'll all know what it is. All right. I think you guys will know this each one within 3 seconds, but we'll just play along. Okay. So here's the first one. All right. So that's Cheer. Oh, not Cheers. Oh my goodness. MASH. Here's the next one. How'd you guess? All right, so that one is Cheers. All right. Did you guys get Seinfeld? All right. Matthew will get this one. No? Friends. The Big Bang Theory. All right, so most of y'all, if you have a TV, recognize probably most, if not all of those. Those are all, if you go online, you look up, best sitcoms, best TV shows ever, every single one of those will be in the top 10. Now, depending on who makes the list, will depend on which is rated higher. If it's an older person, right, it all depends on your generation. Because they're all good shows, but the best one really depends on when you were about 20-something when it came out. Okay, that's the best one. So the interesting thing about all those shows, besides the fact that like I say, they're all highly popular, top 10 best shows of all time, ran for a long time, is that they're all centered on great ensemble casts. And what each show really highlights is actually one of our key words for today, and that is the word community. That is what they all have in common. This mishposh of people that come together and they live out this life that, quite frankly, all of us kind of desire. These shows tap into the deepest part of us because we are social people. We are social people. We are designed to do life with others. Now, occasionally you might have someone who they don't consider themselves as a people person, right? The interesting thing is if you talk to those folks or if you watch a TV show, they're way out in the hills of Alaska, A, there's usually at least one other person in their life. They're more social than you think. And B, the reason they're not social is because they got burned in a social context. And so they're protecting themselves. But deep down, each and every one of us is designed to relate to, want to be in relationship with. We want to be in what this thing that what we use, community. And when we hear those theme songs, they're not just. I could have played you a theme song from a bunch of other shows. Could have been one of the million versions of NCIS or any kind of other show, Doctor Who or whatnot. Okay. But these things aren't even, I don't know that show, but my guess is they brought up emotion for you. They brought up something, the something deep down in your heart, deep down the theme. When you hear that, you just go, ah, yeah. You want to laugh, you want to chuckle. You got a picture of Sheldon in your mind, or Hawkeye, or whoever the case may be, right? And you just kind of laugh. Because not only were these shows that we watched, they were a community that we kind of pseudo-participated in. If we ever met Sheldon in real life, he'd drive us nuts. He's from Big Bang Theory. If you don't know who he is, don't worry about it. Or Kramer, right? Or a bunch of these guys. But because we, quote unquote, know them through the show, we understand them. They're like, oh yeah, he's just being him, or she's just being her. And we feel this closeness. Now, if the textbook definition of community, if you look this up, there's several definitions, but the one we're really talking about is community is a social, religious, occupational, or other group sharing common characteristics or interests that is perceived or perceiving itself as distinct in some respect from the larger society within which it exists. All right? And that, I think the best way to describe it actually comes out of the theme of Cheers. Right? It says this: be glad there's one place in the world where everybody knows your name, and they're always glad you came. You want to go where people know that people are all the same. You want to go where everybody knows your name. I think that is community. Community is a place where you can go that you're accepted, where you can laugh, where you can cry, where people really care about your day. That is community. That is at our deepest core, that is what we desire. We desire a place of acceptance. We desire a place of support. We desire a place where we can laugh and just be ourselves. A place where everybody knows our name and they're always glad you came, even when you show up on a bad day. We kind of get this picture. Actually, we get this picture all throughout the New Testament. But probably one of the highlights is when the church's first birth. It records this in a letter that we call Acts, because it's the Acts of the church. It says this in chapter 2, verses 44 through 46. It says, all the believers, all those who are followers of Jesus, were together. They had everything in common. They sold their possessions and goods, and they gave to anyone as he had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes, and they ate together with glad and sincere hearts. That's the original sitcom right there. That's the original ensemble cast. I mean, that's the picture of that. You go to NBC with that, you got a winner on your hands. You just need some quirky thing to be, for it to go around. And I don't know if they'll go for the establishing the church, but that's in essence what's happening. Is this thing called community was going on. And it's so much beyond, this is the neighborhood we share, right? This is so much beyond, this is the city we live in. True community, like I say, is this sharing of yourself in acceptance of others. Now, we use the word community a lot these days inside the context of this gathering, of gatherings all across, because really of all the confusion around another word. And that other word is the word church. Is the word church. That's kind of our other Christianese word today, is the word church. Actually, church and community should be interchangeable. But they're not. And mainly because nowadays when we think of a church, we think of a building, right? This picture comes to mind. What church do you go to? When someone talks about a church, they think of a physical building where the Baptists meet or the Catholics meet or the first this, that, or the other meet, and it has this, whatever, steeple or, if you haven't been to church in a while, this is probably kind of weird for you right here. There's no pews, there's no, But this is not, when Jesus told Peter, hey, upon you, Peter, I'm going to build my church, Jesus didn't think, oh, I gotta call a construction company because we got to build a building. That's not what he was thinking at all. The word church actually comes from a Greek word, ecclesia, okay? And you don't need to know Greek, okay? Let me just tell you, though, what this word literally means. It literally means an assembly or called out ones, okay? So in the day that this was written, okay, they would say, if we gather together for theater, to watch the theater in the Coliseum or something like that, it would be called an ecclesia. It would be called a church. Okay? If we gather together to debate politics, that gathering will be called an ecclesia. It would be called a church. And it was used of all of these gatherings, and especially these groups of people that were called out, meaning that among all the people, a special group was called out for a special purpose. It's kind of like, think of the Moose Lodge, right? Or some special club, the Boy Scouts or whatnot. Of all the boys, of all the girls, they're called out and they assemble together. That is ecclesia in its most literal form. But there was this special group of ecclesia that kind of used and took over the word so that it became synonymous with who they were. And it was these assemblies, it was these gathering of folks who were following this new religious figure called Jesus. And so the church, that word started to represent an assembly of people who were devoted to follow Jesus, be transformed by Jesus, and to join Jesus on his mission. And you'll recognize that that's what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. And there was so much of an invitation of, are you coming to this assembly, this church? That all of a sudden it just became synonymous. And as the word lost vogue, and then you found other words to describe assemblies, the followers of Jesus continued to use the word. And now today we exclusively use it, at least in our language, in terms of this assembly of people. So to kind of get your head around it, rather than again trying to describe the mechanics of it, what I'd like to do is I'd like to give you a picture of the church in the first century, of what it may look like. A picture of not a building, a picture of this gathering, if you would. All right? So you're going to have to put your imagination caps on. All right? And you're going to have to listen intently because I don't have pictures for this. This is just this little thing that I wrote. All right? And I would tell you, this is one picture. It's not like, this isn't from the Bible. Not like I found an ancient manuscript that described this. This is, I took histories and scholarly work and kind of put it together in kind of story form. All right? So imagine it's 82 AD and you're in some Greek city, Corinth or something like that. Laodiceus wouldn't normally attend such a gathering, but there was something different about Clement. Laodiceus had always admired the Jewish religion and its devotion to one God, but their attitude always seemed towards others, well, elitist. However, Clement seemed different, not just because he was a Greek who worshiped only one God, but he was friendly to Greeks, Jews, and Romans alike. He seemed genuinely concerned about all people. So when Clement asked him if he would want to attend the gathering in Perga, so that's the city we're in, with him, Laodiceus enthusiastically agreed. But he wasn't sure what to expect since he had never been to such a gathering before. The next day, Clement came by the shop where Laodiceus was set up. The sun was about to set, and everyone was wrapping up the day's work. Clement helped Laodiceus bring his wares into a small shop. Then they headed to the west part of the city through the crowds of people trying to make their way home before the last bits of sunlight vanished. They turned down a narrow street that felt even smaller because both sides were lined with 3-foot-story concrete apartments. The downstairs front of the room of many of the apartments had been converted to shop fronts. It was one of these that Clement and Laodiceus stopped at. It had been closed up for the night as the shutters had been tightly fastened. Clement gave a little knock and was quickly answered by a slim man with a full beard. Laodiceus instantly identified him as being a Jew. Laodiceus found this Jew to be very different than the Jews he had encountered before. His name was Joseph, and he warmly greeted Clement with a hearty handshake and a kiss. He also greeted Laodiceus enthusiastically and seemed genuinely pleased that they had come. Joseph led them through the shop and into the rest of the apartment. Here he met several more people. There was Euripides and his wife Agatha, who owned the shop and the apartment. Paris and Melita and their children. There was Irene, a widow who seemed rather well off, Joseph's wife Tabitha, and there was Phaedrus and his slave Nicias. What immediately struck Laodiceus was not just the eclectic mix of people, but that each was treated as if they were family. Clement gave the same warm handshake and a kiss that he exchanged with Joseph to each person there. Greek or Jew, man or woman, slave or free, they each express authentic care for one another. This was even more evident as they delayed the start of dinner for an hour to wait for the arrival of 2 more slaves. When Kairos and Seleucus finally did arrive, everyone was seated around the table. Laodiceus was surprised that he was given the seat of highest honor. He was even more surprised when everyone else, except for Clement, who was seated next to him, took a seat randomly. Once again, there was no distinction made between man or woman, slave or free. The meal was a delicious array of fish, olives, dates, and other assorted vegetables. When it was over, Joseph took a fresh loaf of bread and he split it. Laodiceus thought that he would set some aside as an offering to their God, as was the custom. Instead, though, Joseph passed it out, and each person took a piece. Joseph spoke and reminded them that their God had lived among them and had come to be the bread of life for all who would receive him. And together they ate the bread. Then he raised his cup of wine, and everyone else did the same. Joseph then spoke of how this man, Jesus, had spilled his own blood, that their own souls may be reconciled to God. They were to drink in remembrance not only of his sacrifice, but the joyous fact that he had risen from the dead and was now in heaven. Laodiceus was intrigued at this ritual. First, there was no priest here to lead it. As far as he could tell, Joseph was just an ordinary merchant. Second, though the ritual obviously had special meaning, it was not presented in the normal flowery and spiritual language that most religions used. They simply spoke as if they were in a regular conversation. Lastly, they spoke of their God not only as a great deity, but as a real person who was personally involved in their lives. Laodiceus almost expected this Jesus person to walk in the door at some point. The rest of the evening was just as interesting. The wine was put away after dinner, which was good, seeing that this would keep people in their right mind. However, it was unusual for such a gathering. They sang some songs which Laodiceus recognized from passing by the Jewish temple. The kids themselves had put together an original compositions which sang of the attitude Jesus had of letting everyone, including kids, come to him. Phaedrus shared that he and Nicias had spoken and that Phaedrus was going to make Nicias a free man, though Nicias wanted to continue working for Phaedrus. Then Kairos expressed how he wished that he was a free man and how tough it was to work for his master. Seleucus, also a slave, reminded him about a letter that was originally written to the gathering in Ephesus that encouraged them to serve their master as if they were serving God himself. There were many other words of encouragement for Kairos. Then they began to pray. They prayed for Kairos. They prayed for his master. And they prayed for just about everything else that they had talked about that evening. Laodiceus was once again struck by their care for one another, as well as the earnest yet casual conversation they were having with their God. As the evening came to a conclusion and the torches were lit to light the way home, Laodiceus couldn't help but want to come back and see more of this gathering. This eclectic collection of people and their authentic love for another intrigued him. Their disregard for social position and status, it challenged him. The worth of each individual and the importance of each person's contribution to the gathering inspired him. Also, the power and the personal nature and intimate availability of their God touched his heart. This is a picture of at least one type of gathering. And when Paul wrote his letter to the churches in Galatia, the churches in Ephesus, he wrote it for many gatherings that looked like this. He didn't write it for the one gathering. He would have wrote probably a church to the churches in the Bay Area. And he might have addressed it. It may have been, we might call it the Jose letter, because that would be the major city in the Bay Area, or the Francisco letter. But it wasn't written to one church in San Jose. It wasn't written to one church in San Francisco. It is written to the church. It is written to these pockets of people who gathered, that they called the church, the gathering, the church, that simply came together to celebrate and encourage one another in Jesus and this good news that they experience. That is the church. That is the church. So I just want to talk about a few of the characteristics, if you would, of the church. What are some things that kind of stick out? And I kind of want to go back and I want to do a review of our sitcoms, of these communities, if you would. MASH is literally a mishposh of folks. Mostly, though, because they're a MASH unit, they're a medical unit. These are white, middle upper class professionals. And they come together, and they come from all walks of life, but the commonality is the medical field. The commonality is they want to help, and the commonality is they're under all this pressure that comes in time of war. Cheers, completely different setting, right? This is a bar. Where was the bar? What city? Boston. In Boston. I can't even say it right, but you know what I mean. And again, this is mostly, not exclusively, mostly a Caucasian group of folks. They also come, that's one of the great things, they come from all walks of life. You have the mailman, and you have the psychologist, right? And how that all Fraser and how that all kind of mishmashes up. But the commonality here is they all need a place to kind of unwind. They all need a place that's kind of away from the worries of the world, and this bar kind of serves as that. Seinfeld, it's best if you just take Seinfeld at the surface, because when you dig deep, these are four people that do not have a high view of humanity, that are extremely sarcastic and bitter and a lot of not good things. But the thing is, they all have that in common, right? There's always something wrong with someone. It could be their toes, it could be their hair, it could be the way they're shaped, right? And it's kind of like them against the world. They're all this kind of rugged, one's in New York, right? All these New Yorkers. And again, pretty much Caucasian. Friends, right? At least it started out, they're all young, urban professionals, some struggling, some doing okay. But they're, again, lily white, across the board. They have this commonality. Big Bang Theory. This is probably the one that's more, at least in terms of race, a little bit more culture, a little bit more variety. But except for poor Penny, the thing that they all have in common is this high intellect, this high scientific kind of mind. And this really kind of, and this kind of nerdiness, right? At least among the guys, which is what it really starts with. It starts with these core guys who all like comic books, right? They all like kind of the same shows. They all like playing video games together. And there's this commonality among them. Now, if I was to give you, and the great thing, again, these all show you a great picture of community. But they're not a picture of the church. If I was to give you a picture of the church, it would look like this. This would be the ensemble cast. Okay? You would take Phoebe and Cliff and Hawkeye and Elaine and Raj, and they would come together from their various backgrounds, from their various cultures, right? They have nothing in common. I mean, maybe except that they all speak English, okay? Other than that, they're from different places, they're from different economic backgrounds, they're from different ages, they care about different things, okay? Try writing a sitcom for this group of characters. It would almost be impossible. And even if you did, who would watch it? Why? Because folks from these different, they don't hang out together. They don't have enough in commonality. They don't have enough to talk about. But that is the church. The church is folks that are come from all these different kinds of community or from places where they lack community. And they come together and they have a shared experience. Their shared experience is Jesus. Their shared experience is that they've experienced the God of gods and the King of kings and the Lord of lords. And in the powerlessness of their lives, as whatever it was, it may not have been economic. They may be doing really well. It may be, in Hawkeye's case, it may be the brokenness over years and years of seeing meaningless death. Right? It may be the loneliness that for many years Raj, right, dealt with. But Jesus comes in and he ministers to them. And they come together not to celebrate the medical field, not to celebrate we're young, we're going to take the world by storm, not to celebrate science and how, not to make fun of people. They come together to celebrate the God of gods, the King of kings, the Lord of lords, Jesus. But they don't just come together. They begin to do life together. That's where it gets interesting. And that's what we like about these sitcoms. It's one thing if folks just kind of come and they met for, a half hour or whatnot, and they've done shows like that. It's a therapy group or whatnot, and they do okay. But nothing lasts like these people who do life together, right? I mean, half the time you're watching the show and you're like, do any of these people work? Because they seem to always, and that's, by the way, why none of these shows get into kids. Because you just don't have time when you have kids. There's no way to have that kind of community when you have kids. They all kind of peter out about that time. And you add that to the mishmash, and when people begin to have the kind of community that is usually reserved just for people who have certain characteristics together, it begins to look like what the church looked like, which was unique about the church. Like somebody came to Jesus and they said to Jesus, hey, what are the greatest commandments? What's the summation of the law? And another time he asked somebody else, what's the summation of the law? And they came up with the same answer, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, right? And love your neighbor as yourself. At the very end of Jesus' time on earth, he's facing his own death, and he is human and is overwhelmed at the thought of it. If nothing else, he's overwhelmed at the thought of he's got true community, and he's about to leave this community. These men and women who mean so much to him. But then he does something in the midst of it. The teacher washes their feet. He serves them. Nobody else was willing to do this, but the teacher does. And then this is what he says. He says, a new command I give you. This comes out of John 13. Love one another. Now, the reason this was a new command is because the God of the Hebrew Scriptures, our God, had never physically come down to earth and lived among us. He had done many miracles. He had opened up the Red Sea, right? He had defeated enemies. He had brought water out from the desert and fed them miraculously. But he'd never been among them and served them in this way. So Jesus says, a new commandment I give you. Love one another, specifically as I have loved you. So you must love one another. Now notice this line. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. If you love one another. There'll be a distinct mark that people will know that you're my follower if you love one another. Now, when I watch Big Bang, when I watch Seinfeld, when I watch Cheers, when I watch whatever, I don't look at them and go, boy, that's evident of Jesus. And I think sometimes we think, if someone would just come to church and they'd see how we shake hands and how we smile and we like to get together, man, they would know that, there's Jesus there. No, they wouldn't. That's happening all over the city. Happens at bowling leagues. Right? It happens at little league ball games when parents come together, and the red side, they're all community, and the green side, they're all community. And they get along, and they laugh, and they shake hands, and how are you doing? And they even carpool together sometimes. And does that show Jesus? No. But in the midst of this, Jesus does two things. A, he washes their feet. He serves them way beyond what his rights dictate that they serve him. But he reverses it by serving them. And then second, they're going to see this in light of what's about to happen, that he died for them, which is why we read Philippians 2, one of the original creeds, before communion today. Let your attitude, be the same as Christ Jesus, who did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. In other words, he was God. He was equal to God. Yet what? He made himself a servant. He served us. So what does this loving one another look like? That everyone will be convinced those must be disciples of Jesus. When we die to ourselves and we pour out ourselves for each other. In a radical way where you're like, okay, how come a bunch of 20-something-year-olds, you got a family of 4, and you got in a completely different stage of life, and all of a sudden you're moving or something's happened in your life and a bunch of 20-year-olds show up at your house to help. How does that work? Do they work for you? Are those interns at your office? No, they're from our church. They're family. Church not as in our building, church as the gathering of people. Because the church isn't a building, the churching is a gathering of like-minded people that are committed to one another. In your bulletin, there's the little notes page, and on the back there's a list of what I call the one another's. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll just point out a few of them. Galatians 6:2 says, carry one another's burdens. And this goes way beyond, hey, how are you doing? we have a thing here at our body called the Fellowship Fund. For those of you who fill out an envelope, you'll see that little box. The Fellowship Fund is 90% plus to help those in our community who hit a rocky patch. They can't afford food. They lost a job and they just need help with a month or two to cover living expenses. And folks sacrifice. They look at their budget and they sacrifice money for that. But it goes way beyond that, you guys. It goes to, you need help moving. We'll help you move. Recently, we had a family that barely making it. And all of a sudden, they find out that they can't live in their home anymore. They're being evicted. And because they're going to, update it and rent it for more, you know that story in the Bay Area. And they're barely making it as it is. There's no way they have finances to move, let alone the ability to move and handle all that, let alone the ability to pay the new rent and all that comes with that. And a group of folks from this gathering come alongside them. We didn't do this. You didn't hear us announce this up front. It happened all behind the scenes. They raised $5,000 to give them first and last. People showed up and moved them. People made meals for them. People visited them. And even to this day, they continue. There are folks, the key folks that continue to show up and clean house and just help with this transition. Now, in normal everyday life, these folks would have been on their own. They would have maybe stand in some long lines and waited for months upon months upon months for the government to kind of give them some kind of assistance. But who knows where they would have been all those months. But now they're in a new place, and the people around them, they can share. They can share their story. And they can share how people help them pay first and last. And who are these people? Are they your family? No. Do you work with these people? No. They're the gathering. And it was so much more than money. It was people showing up at our house. And not just once, by the way, but weekly. Weekly. It says in Colossians 3:13, we're supposed to forgive one another. There's a modern kind of thing that's happening here that grieves my heart, and I think it grieves the heart of God. There are folks that they've come to church and they've met real people. And guess what? Real people are messy. They're like that ensemble cast I was pointing out. Okay? And they're like, church is a bunch of hypocrites. Why? Because I got hurt there, I got burned there, or whatever reason. And so they're like, you know what? I got my 2 or 3 Christian friends together and we meet at a coffee shop. Well, now that's our church. I don't need to go to church. Again, they're thinking about a building, but that's our church. Here's the problem. The church is meant to be hard. The church is meant to be hard. Because if you get 2 or 3 people that are like you together and you agree on everything, you don't represent Jesus to anyone. That's not Jesus. Like I said, that's a good bowling league. That's a bunch of buddies hanging out. Now you get people together and somebody says the wrong thing, right? Or everybody else at the church dresses a different way, or whatever the issue may be, and they continue to love one another. They continue to extend grace to each other. They forgive one another. Then something Jesus-like is happening. But you can't be like Jesus. You cannot wash feet unless there are people present that you don't want to wash their feet. If you only wash the feet of the people that you want to, you're not like Jesus. Jesus should have had them wash his feet, but he didn't. He washed theirs. And if we always put ourselves in a context where I like to hang out, I get this person, they get me, where's Jesus in that? How do folks really get to see that we're his disciples? Through that. You know where they get to see that we're disciples? When people of all colors, of all kinds of different personalities, of all kinds of different socioeconomic backgrounds, come together and they serve and they forgive one another. The Hebrews 3:13 encourage one another. The Hebrews 10:24 motivate one another to do good deeds. Hebrews 10:25, they continually meet with one another. There's such a commitment to this community that when everyone else is always running off, you're like, you know what? I mean, I can miss an occasional. It's not like it's a religious thing. If you miss Sunday, you know, you're going to get a bag mark from God. But I have a high commitment to this family. Whether it's, again, Sunday or Wednesday, it doesn't matter. The day doesn't matter. I have a high commitment to this family because it's not just about going. It's not just like going to school. A lot of us treat church, the gathering, that way. The gathering is a place where I go. A, I want to experience God, and B, I want to hear about God, and then I leave. Well, that's not a gathering at all. You might as well just go to Bible school, right? And you can be done with Bible school in 4 years and just forget church altogether, if that's really your goal. But that's not the goal of our gathering. It's part of it, but that's not the goal. The goal is to spur one another on. The goal is the trial and error of if I can love other people in Jesus, then there's hope that when I go to the office and there's somebody driving me crazy. When I have an out-of-control boss or someone that's working for me that just is completely disrespectful. If I've practiced with you, loving you, a safe person who should be forgiving me and encouraging me, and then now I have the skills to go out into the world and do the same. That is what the church is about. It's about a messy, broken, messed up folks from all kinds of crazy backgrounds coming together in the commonality that God is real, and you know that God is real because the way that they're serving one another is beyond explanation. And if God ain't real, they're sure convinced that he is. Because there's no other explanation for what you see. There's just no other explanation. So I would challenge you to stop going to church. You thought you'd never hear that, huh? I would challenge you to stop going to church and start being the church. Stop going to church and start being the church. Being that gathering of like-minded, unified around Jesus. We may not be unified about how fast or what era or what instruments to use with worship. Okay. It's one of the reasons we have a little bit of variety around here. But we unify around the fact that what matters is that we worship God. No matter how loud or soft or whether it's from the 1800s or the last 10 years or whatever the song was written, we agree, we have unity over to worship God because of what he did for all of us. And we are committed to one another. I want to leave you with this challenge right here. Out of 1 John, some of you might be wondering, hey, when's the 3:16, right? Isn't this supposed to be all the 3:16s, right? Here's my 3:16. 1 John 3:16. 1 John 3:16 says this. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us. That is love. And we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. You want to know what love is? Jesus. If you're a follower of Jesus, lay down your lives for each other. And then he gets a little bit specific in 17 through 20. It says this, if anyone has material possession and sees his brother or sister in need, but has no pity on him, how can the love of God be in him? You see that there? You cannot call yourself a disciple of Jesus and not see your brothers and sisters in Christ, this is specifically in this context, those inside the body of believers, and not have pity, not your heart be broken. Dear children, let us not love with words or tongue, but with actions and in truth. Let us love one another in actions and in truth. This then is how we know that we belong to the truth and how we set our hearts at rest in his presence whenever our hearts condemn us. For God is greater than our hearts, and he knows everything. We belong to the truth. The truth is, God did for us what we cannot do ourselves. So we're always going to come up short here. But the truth is, as Jesus enters in our life, the Holy Spirit begins to work in our lives. And the fruit that the Holy Spirit is really there, the fruit that I am a disciple of and a follower of Jesus, is that step by step, small steps, but step by step, I'm not attending, I don't believe something, I'm becoming something. I'm becoming the church. I'm becoming like Jesus. I'm loving like Jesus. And the way that looks is not that I go around going, I love you. God bless you. Good to see you today. That's not what it looks like at all. I mean, that might accompany it. But what it looks like is, I got a busy day. I have no extra time. But I saw on Facebook that so-and-so needs a meal. So we're going to cook a little extra and take it over as a family. We've been saving for X amount of months or whatnot to take this great vacation. And I just heard that someone lost a job and they're about to lose not their fancy home, not just the basic necessity of a roof over their head. You know what? I think we can cut back a little bit on the vacation. Right? We'll do one less stop, or we won't eat out as much. And I can give some of this money to help them. You know what? It's the middle of the week. Oh, and I don't want to go out. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. But my family's there at the gathering. And I just want to go encourage someone. I want to go and be encouraged. I don't want to forsake the gathering of brothers and sisters. Don't go to church. Be the church. Just take one step in. If you just kind of come and go, hey, your one step could be just linger an extra 10 minutes and talk to someone. Come on Wednesday evening. Okay? We're kind of at the end, I understand, of our things, but starting April 1st, we start all new. We'll have a whole bunch of other discipleship experiences on Wednesday night. If you can make it, I understand sometimes you got work and other things. I get it. It's not a guilt trip, right? Go before God. Do what God shows you to do. Some of you may need to get before God and go, how do I free up? Is there somebody that I need to give to? Do you want me to more faithfully give to the fellowship fund above and beyond what I'm already doing, dear God? Who do you know? Who are you avoiding? That's the other thing. Who are you avoiding here that you're like, I just don't get that person. They don't get me. It's just, maybe the step is, you know what, God? Help me love that person. Help me learn to communicate with them and experience the community you want me to experience. I'm not asking you to do it all, because you can't. That's why Jesus came. But just grow. Do you understand what community is now? Does church make sense? Because I know the outside world, they just think it's a religious gathering that you come and we indoctrinate you, and it's all about getting your money. And quite frankly, we're probably to blame for that, because for a long time, that's all the world ever saw. Churches got bigger, they got elaborate, they had their holy huddles, they came out enough to tell everybody what they're doing wrong, and then they disappeared. That's not the church. What they should see is a group of people that are dedicated and love each other and that want to be like Jesus and are pouring themselves out for one another and for their community around them, because they're learning little by little to love, 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 love. And not just people who look and sound like them that make sense, but the people who don't look and sound like them, which just baffles them. Then that must be Jesus. Will you pray with me? Father God, I just thank you for your love. I thank you. I thank you for all the folks that have stepped up and they're learning to be your body. They're learning the one another's. Not perfectly, but in process. Those who have sacrificed and have given money, those who sacrificed and given their times, those who sacrifice and are pouring into others, even amongst us, and supporting them emotionally and counseling them, dear God. And I thank you for our deacons who so faithfully, they carry the burdens of others and really help us meet the needs of others, dear God. I specifically, God, want to lift up our sister Brianna to you, dear Lord, because we know that her heart is broken. She's mourning right now. She's lost her grandma this week, dear God. And we as a family just want to say, just love on her, encourage her, give her strength where there is no strength. Heal her heart, dear God. And illuminate our eyes of how we may just encourage her and love on her, Father, and that family. Help us not just talk about this stuff, but do this stuff. Not for our glory, but for the glory of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.